On my 63rd birthday, my son took me out to the countryside, dropped me off next to a rundown shack, and said, "This is your gift. You live here now." He left me deep in the sticks, but little did he know, a neighbor was already making his way over to lend a hand. Hey there, dear listeners. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoy stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button. I love seeing where you're listening from, so feel free to drop a comment. Now, get comfy and enjoy the story. For most of my life, I thought there weren't many moments worth telling. I lived quietly, often unnoticed. Even in my condo, which my late husband Paul and I bought ages ago, I felt like a ghost, just another piece of furniture. For the last decade, that condo really belonged to my son Darren and his wife Tiffany. I had the smallest room, once a storage closet, filled with my books, Paul's old photographs, and his favorite armchair. Over time, everything else faded away into the trendy, bright space Tiffany adored. I didn't complain. Why bother? My main concern was Darren's happiness. Every morning started the same for me. I'd rise before anyone else at 6 a.m., careful not to wake them. I'd tiptoe into the kitchen, making grits for Darren and brewing two kinds of tea, strong black for him and a fancy herbal blend for Tiffany. I'd make myself a simple black tea and sip it alone in my room to stay out of sight. My Social Security check went straight into their joint account. "Mama, why do you need money?" Darren would awkwardly ask, avoiding my eyes. "We buy everything together," he'd say, and I'd agree. Why did I need it anyway? My clothes were hand-me-downs, and I rarely went out, just to the grocery store or pharmacy. My wishes had shrunk down to one, seeing my son happy. I remember giving them all my savings, money set aside for cataract surgery, when Tiffany suddenly wanted a new designer handbag. "Mommy, you understand?" she'd coo, wrapping her arms around my shoulders. "Darren's colleagues are so high status. I have to match. It's important for his career." Darren would nod gratefully, and I'd hand over the cash. After that, I just started buying stronger reading glasses. My opinions didn't carry weight in that house. If I mentioned the soup was too salty, Tiffany would purse her lips and say, "Mama, you're getting older. Your taste buds aren't what they used to be." If I tried to offer advice based on my experiences, Darren would gently interrupt, "Mama, things are different now. We'll figure it out ourselves." And they did. I became a function, the cook, the housekeeper, the interest-free ATM, an invisible woman whose presence was convenient but not essential. Sometimes in the evenings, sitting in my armchair, I'd look at Paul's photo and ask, "Paul, did we raise our son right? He's a good boy, isn't he? This is just how life is now." Paul stayed silent in the photograph, and I convinced myself I was doing the right thing. After all, a mother should sacrifice for her child, right? When my 63rd birthday rolled around, I expected nothing. Maybe a small bouquet of daisies or a box of gourmet dark chocolate. Surprisingly, Tiffany was affectionate that morning, even hugging me and chirping, "Happy birthday, Mommy. Darren and I have a gift for you that will leave you speechless." I melted a little, feeling that warm childhood anticipation stirring inside me. Darren was oddly flustered, constantly checking his watch. "Get ready, Mama. We're going to pick up your gift." I put on my best dress, the only one that wasn't worn out, a simple gingham dress with a small floral print. I looked in the mirror and saw an elderly woman with tired but somehow happy eyes. We got in the car and Tiffany stayed behind, claiming she had a headache. "You two go ahead without me," she waved. We drove for quite a while, city streets turning into suburban highways and then into dreary fields and woods. I tried asking Darren where we were going, but he curtly replied, "It's a surprise, Mama. You'll see." I fell silent, watching the scenery pass by. My anxiety grew. This road wasn't leading to a celebration, but deep into the wilderness. Finally, we turned onto a bumpy dirt road, the car shaking so much my teeth rattled. All around us were abandoned fields, overgrown with weeds and crooked utility poles. Up ahead, a village came into view, or what remained of it. A few houses sunk into decay, blackened by time. None looked lived in. Darren parked next to the ugliest structure, more of a shack than a house, with a sagging roof and boarded-up windows. Weeds surrounded it, tall as a man, and the fence was rotting. "We're here," he said flatly as he turned off the engine. I was silent, unable to comprehend. This couldn't be right. It had to be a mistake or a cruel joke. Darren got out of the car, opened the trunk, and pulled out my old canvas bag, the one I used for weekend trips 20 years ago. It had a change of clothes, a robe, and a bar of soap. He set it on the ground next to a thicket of bushes. There you go, Mama. This is your gift. Tiffany and I bought you a house, your own place with fresh air. You'll live here. It'll be good for you. His words dropped into the silence like stones into a well. I looked at him, my son, and didn't recognize him. His face looked foreign, his eyes empty and glassy. No malice, no pity, just exhaustion and irritation. Darren, I whispered, my voice failing me. What is this? Why? Mama, don't start, he grimaced. We decided this would be best for everyone. You need a break from the city hustle, and we need our own space. Tiffany is pregnant. He tossed that last bit out like it was an excuse for everything. He didn't even look at me. He rushed back to the car and slammed the door. I stood there, watching him through the windshield as he started the engine. At that moment, the roar of the engine shattered the silence, and something shifted inside me. It wasn't rage or hurt, it was something else. It felt like a key turning in a rusty lock. Click. Instead of warmth, I felt cold, absolute, crystal clear ice. The car moved, raising a cloud of dust. I didn't cry or scream after him. I just watched as the silver sedan shrank into a dot and disappeared around the bend. The dust settled, the smell of gasoline faded, and all that was left was me, my old bag, and a dead house on the edge of a dead town. In that silence, for the first time in years, I heard myself, not just as a mother or mother-in-law, but as Evelyn Reed. And this Evelyn spoke to me clearly. That's it. Enough. I realized this wasn't the end. It was the beginning, and nobody was going to take my life from me anymore. I would take it back myself. I stood there, motionless, listening to the fading sound of the engine. When that faded too, a silence fell over me, one I hadn't experienced since visiting my grandmother in the country as a child. But this silence was oppressive, not alive. I turned to look at the gift, a timber shack, blackened by time and weather, with its boarded-up windows. The porch leaned sideways, and one of the steps had fallen through, exposing last year's damp leaves. Weeds and wild raspberry vines tangled around it, painting a picture of desolation, a place forgotten by everyone. Tears? No, I felt as dry as a desert. That icy click in my chest had frozen everything that might have spilled out in bitter sobs. Despair remained somewhere in my past, in the car that had carried my son away. Here, on this abandoned land, all that remained was me and a cold clarity in my head. I approached the porch, stepping carefully around the rotting plank, and set my bag on the surviving edge. My gaze skimmed over the misery, but my mind was already far away in my bright, clean 3-bedroom condo on Peachtree Road, the very place where Tiffany was probably deciding on new curtains for my old room. My old condo was the key word. The pathetic look of this crippled house reminded me of something I had tried not to think about for years. I recalled my late husband Paul's words. We sat in that same kitchen 10 years before he passed, and he placed documents in front of me, looking serious. Evie, he said, I'm going to the attorney tomorrow to transfer my share entirely to you so you'll be the sole owner. I waved my hands, asking why. We're a family. We have a son. But he shook his head. A son is one thing, but life is long. Anything can happen. You are all I have, and I need to make sure you always have a roof over your head. Yours and no one else's. I didn't think much of it then, but I did as he asked. After his death, all the documents were filed in my name, Evelyn Reed, the sole and rightful owner. Darren didn't know about this. He thought the condo was joint inheritance that would naturally pass to him. I never disabused him of that notion. Why would I? It seemed petty, a lack of trust in my own son. How wrong I was. Then there was a second memory, even more important. About 5 years ago, I received notice of an inheritance. A distant cousin of mine from Birmingham, Alabama, whom I'd only seen once as a child, had passed away. Alone and childless, she left me her modest 1-bedroom apartment. I handled the paperwork, sold it quickly, and put the entire amount into a separate savings account at the bank. I didn't tell Darren or Tiffany. They were busy taking out a loan for a new car. I knew what would happen if they found out about my money. It wouldn't be stolen. It would dissolve into urgent needs, into status, into their future, just like my retirement income and old savings had. I remained silent, not out of greed, but out of an instinct for self-preservation that I thought had withered away. This account was my untouchable reserve, my last line of defense. Thoughts flashed through my head, clear and sharp. I opened my bag. Darren must have packed it in a hurry. Inside were an old terry cloth robe, slippers, towels, and a bar of laundry soap. At the very bottom, among those simple belongings, lay my savior, an old flip phone that Tiffany had contemptuously called a grandma phone. They bought it for me a few years back so I could stay in touch. The simplest one, no internet, no extra features. They had no idea its memory held the numbers that mattered most to me. I pressed the power button. The battery was almost full. I kept it charged out of habit. But the screen showed no network signal, and my heart fluttered for a second. Was it all for nothing? I looked around. The town lay in a valley. I needed to get higher up. Without hesitation, I followed an overgrown path up a small hill. My feet caught on thistles, branches whipped at my face, but I didn't care. I walked, staring at the phone screen like it was a compass. Finally, at the top of the hill, where a crooked cedar tree stood, two faint signal bars appeared. Enough. I found the number for Mr. Harrison, the branch manager at the bank, who had known me since Paul and I opened our first savings account together. I pressed call. The rings were long and drawn out. "Hello," a familiar, slightly weary voice answered. "Mr. Harrison, it's Evelyn Reed." I was surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "Evelyn, good afternoon. How can I help you?" "Mr. Harrison, I need you to do a few things urgently if possible." "I'm listening." "First, please immediately block all powers of attorney and access to my accounts that are in my son Darren's name. Everything, no exceptions." A pause lingered. "Are you sure, Evelyn?" "Absolutely," I cut in. "Second, please redirect all my retirement deposits that go into the joint account to my personal savings account, the one I opened 5 years ago." "Yes, of course, it will be done." And third, completely block Darren's access to viewing the balance of all my accounts. Complete financial isolation. From now on, all operations on my accounts must have my personal confirmation. "I understand, Evelyn. Everything will be executed within an hour." "Thank you, Mr. Harrison. Goodbye." I hung up. The first part of my plan was in motion. Now for the second part. I found another number, Marcus Jones, the attorney who helped with the cousin's inheritance paperwork. He answered almost immediately. "Marcus, it's Evelyn Reed. We worked together on the Birmingham apartment." "Mrs. Reed, of course. How can I help you?" "I need your help. It concerns my condo on Peachtree Road. I need to officially confirm my sole ownership and prepare documents that will exclude any claims against it from third parties, including my son." The lawyer paused for a moment, processing my request. "I understand you want to completely secure your property. That's wise. Email me a copy of your ID and the property deeds, and I'll get started." "I can't send anything right now. I'm out of town and left the documents in the condo. But can you start by inquiring with the County Register of Deeds and pulling all the relevant files?" "Yes, absolutely. I can start immediately." "Great. I'm counting on you." I hung up. The cold in my chest hadn't gone away, but now it felt different. Not the cold of shock, but the cold of steel, a tool ready for action. I walked back down the hill, and the house looked different now. It no longer seemed like a grave, but rather a temporary headquarters, a quiet, secluded place from which I would wage my bloodless war. At that moment, I knew that in my condo, my son and his wife were likely toasting champagne, celebrating how cleverly they had pulled everything off. "We finally got rid of the old lady," Tiffany would be saying, taking a sip. "Now we can start the renovations and live like real people." They were celebrating their victory, unaware that they had just lost a war they didn't even know had begun. I stood on the threshold of my new temporary refuge, took a deep breath, and though the air smelled damp and decayed, it felt clean. It was the air of freedom. For the first few hours, I simply sat on the surprisingly sturdy porch, gazing at the overgrown yard. The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft watercolor hues. The air felt thick, smelling of decaying leaves and damp earth, something wild and unfamiliar. The city doesn't smell like this. It smells of gasoline, dust, and other people's haste. Here, time felt frozen, just like this abandoned town. When night fell and the cold crept under my gingham dress, I knew I had to act. Sitting on the porch wouldn't warm me or quench my thirst. The chill in my chest was internal, giving me strength, but my body had its own demands. I carefully made my way across the boards and entered the house. Inside, the air was even thicker: dust, mouse droppings, and old compressed wood. Thin strips of moonlight broke through the cracks in the boarded-up windows, casting strange patterns on the floor. I took out my old phone and turned on the flashlight. The dim beam illuminated a potbelly stove with chipped tiles, a table covered in a thick layer of gray dust, and an overturned stool. I felt no fear, just a strange businesslike curiosity, as if I were taking over from a neglectful owner. I explored the two rooms. One had a sagging iron bed with a rusty spring. The other was empty except for some rags in the corner. The floor creaked under my steps, but it held firm. The house was old but built to last. It hadn't fallen apart, it had just fallen asleep. My first task was to find water. I went outside, using the flashlight to search the property, and miraculously, behind the house, I found an old well. The frame was darkened by time, and the oak windlass was heavy but intact. I struggled to turn the handle. It squeaked and groaned, but the chain descended. A minute later, I heard a dull splash. Water. This was my first small victory. I found an old galvanized bucket on the porch, surprisingly not rusted through, and after several attempts managed to pull it up, full to the brim. The water was icy and smelled of silt, but it was clear. I carried the bucket into the house, feeling the muscles in my back ache from the unfamiliar strain. For the next 2 days, I worked. I didn't think about Darren or Tiffany. My world had narrowed down to this house and yard. I found an old saw and an axe in the shed, chopped off dry branches from a fallen apple tree, and started a fire in the stove. Initially, smoke billowed into the room, but then the chimney warmed up, and the draft roared, filling the house with warmth. I scrubbed the table and floor in one room, and the wash water turned black. I hauled dry straw from the shed, stuffed an old mattress I found in the attic with it, and made my sleeping surface less hard. I lived like Robinson Crusoe, and this simple physical labor cleared my mind. Every evening, I climbed my hill to catch the signal and just looked at the screen. 2 bars, my link to the outside world. I didn't call anyone. I waited. I knew they would call. On the 3rd day, closer to evening, as I sat on the porch finishing a cup of herbal tea made from currant leaves I'd found, my phone rang piercingly, shattering the evening silence. It was Darren. I let it ring a few more times before answering. Inside, I felt calm. "Yes?" I said. "Mama, finally! Where have you been? I've been trying to call you for an hour." His voice had that familiar condescending irritation. "I haven't been walking, Darren. I've been breathing the air. There's plenty of it here," I replied evenly. "Okay, so how are you settling in?" he asked, sounding like someone performing an unpleasant but necessary task. "Settling in little by little. Thanks for checking." He missed my quiet irony entirely. "Listen, Mama, something happened. Tiffany's card didn't work at the store. Your supplementary one. There's definitely money in it. I checked this morning. You didn't accidentally press something, did you? Maybe a glitch at the bank." Ah, there it was, the first ripple in their calm. I remained silent, letting him talk. "You need to call and tell them everything's fine. Tiffany is upset. She wanted to buy a dress." I imagined the scene, my daughter-in-law in a luxury boutique handing over my debit card and seeing the word declined on the terminal. Her surprise, then indignation. How dare it? The old lady's account failed. "Mama, are you listening?" Darren rushed me. "I hear you," I said quietly. Then I heard him cover the phone with his hand, not very well. "I don't know, she's silent, just sitting there." In response, I heard Tiffany's voice, clear as glass. I'd recognize it anywhere. Contemptuous, hissing. "Why are you even talking to her? She's putting on a show. Decided to act tough in her old age. Hurt her feelings, did we? She'll sit out there in the sticks without a dime and she'll be back to silk in no time. She'll call us herself. Tell her not to be stupid. Tell her to go fix it. I need that dress." Then Darren's voice again, quieter, conciliatory. "Tiff, wait." And hers again, louder. "What? Wait. The guy for the kitchen estimate is coming tomorrow, and we haven't paid the property tax. I got a text today about the debt. Did she turn that off from her grandma phone too? Senility is setting in, I tell you. We shouldn't have bought her a house. We should have been looking for a nursing home placement. Senility, a show, sit without a dime." Those words didn't wound me. They were a final diagnosis. They confirmed everything I understood that day. Darren left me on that road. To them, I wasn't a person or a mother. I was an object, an inconvenient, aging piece of furniture that had suddenly begun to glitch. They weren't trying to fix it. They were just angry it had stopped working properly. All the tiny slivers of hope tucked away in the farthest corners of my soul evaporated in that moment. The ice in my chest became harder than granite. The rustling sound returned to the phone, and Darren's voice grew louder, directed at me. Mama, are you there? So, will you call the bank? I inhaled. The air was cool and clean. No, Darren, I said softly but clearly. What? No, you can't or you won't. Disbelief colored his voice. Figure it out yourselves, I said, and pressed the end call button. I put the phone down and gazed at the darkening yard for a long time. I wasn't angry anymore. I felt a cold, righteous calm. They had passed judgment on themselves. They had called things by their true names. They thought this was my small, pathetic rebellion, my show. They couldn't imagine this wasn't a show. It was the final curtain, and it was dropping on them right now. Days passed, blurring into one long, meaningful effort. I stopped counting whether it was the fourth or fifth day. What difference did it make? Here, in this silence, time wasn't measured by numbers on a calendar, but by tasks completed. The swept floor, the bucket of clean water, the first tentative firing of the stove that filled the house with the cozy smell of warmth and smoke. My anger, that cold anger born on the dusty road, settled. It hadn't vanished. It had sunk to the bottom of my soul like a heavy frost, becoming my foundation. I no longer thought about them, Darren and Tiffany. I thought about myself. It turned out to be a strange and unfamiliar occupation. On the second day, I decided to explore the attic. Climbing the rickety makeshift ladder, I expected to find only junk and cobwebs, and that's what I saw. But in the far corner, under a layer of old sacks, I found a small unlocked wooden chest. I blew off the dust, and it swirled in a sunbeam breaking through a hole in the roof. Inside, resting on yellowed fabric, were neat stacks of letters tied with twine and a thick album with a velvet cover. I brought it downstairs, sat on the porch, and opened it. The faces of long-gone people looked up at me. Serious men in uniforms, women in simple headscarves, round-faced children, weddings, military send-offs, simple photos in a field. An entire life lived in this house stared back at me. I didn't know these people, but I felt a strange kinship with them. They, too, had lived, worked, loved, and raised children on this land. I turned the pages and thought about my own album, the one left behind in the city, the thick blue one with photos of Paul and me, our wedding, Darren's birth, his first day of school, college. There we were, all together by the ocean, Darren just a boy building a sandcastle. And here were Paul and I, alone in the park a year before he passed. My condo wasn't just walls and square footage. It was an album, too, a repository of my life. Every cup, every book on the shelf, every scratch on the floor was a line in my story. The thought that strangers unfamiliar to my spirit now ruled there stung sharper than any reproach. I realized I wasn't fighting for property. I was fighting for my past, for the right to my own memory. With these thoughts in mind, I climbed my communication hill toward evening. I wanted to call my lawyer, Marcus Jones, to see if there was any news. I had no illusions. I knew these cases weren't settled quickly, but I needed to hear that the process was moving. He answered immediately, as if he were waiting for my call, but his voice wasn't as cheerful as before. It was tense. Mrs. Reed, good evening. I'm glad you called. I was just about to look for you. Is something wrong, Marcus? My heart, which had been steady and calm, did an anxious somersault. Let's just say we have some complications. He chose his words carefully. I made the preliminary inquiries as we agreed. Your ownership of the condo on Peachtree Road is indisputable. You are the sole owner. Well, what's the problem? I asked impatiently. He paused. Mrs. Reed, there is an encumbrance on your condo. The word was unfamiliar to me. What does that mean? It means there are certain restrictions placed on your property. It cannot be sold, gifted, or otherwise transacted until this encumbrance is removed. What encumbrance? Where did it come from? The cold began to return, but this time it was different, anxious, prickly. Then Marcus said something that split my world into before and after. Mrs. Reed, your condo is being held as collateral by a commercial bank. A mortgage agreement for a very large sum has been taken out against it. I fell silent, unable to inhale. The air was stuck in my throat. Collateral mortgage? How? When? The agreement was signed 8 months ago, Marcus answered. 8 months. A picture flashed in my mind. Last winter. I was seriously ill, pneumonia. I lay with a high fever for 2 weeks, mostly delirious. Darren was at work, and Tiffany took care of me. She was so attentive, bringing me broths, changing my compresses, running to the pharmacy, and constantly fussing with some papers. Mommy, these documents came from the tax office. You have to sign them before the deadline. Don't get up, I'll bring them to you. Mommy, this is just a form for the HOA, a mere formality, just initial here. I remembered her slipping the sheets under my pen. I could barely see what was written. The letters swam before my eyes from weakness and fever. I trusted her. She was my son's wife, my family. I signed without looking, just wanting her to leave me alone so I could sink back into blessed oblivion. Marcus, my voice trembled, but I quickly got a hold of myself. Is my signature on there? Yes, Mrs. Reed. According to the documents, you personally acted as the borrower. The signature is notarized, but I've already requested copies. There was no need for him to finish. I understood everything. This wasn't just forgery. It was betrayal at my most vulnerable moment. They hadn't just deceived me. They had exploited my illness, my weakness, my trust. They watched me fight for every breath while coolly slipping a financial noose under my pen. How much is the sum? I asked, my voice sounding like metal scraping on glass. The lawyer named the figure, and it was monstrous, comparable to the value of the condo itself. Money I wouldn't see even if I lived 3 more lifetimes. Something broke inside me. The thin thread that tied me to my former belief in people and family in my son didn't just snap, it decayed, turning to ash. I suddenly saw everything in its true light. Their plan wasn't just to evict me from the condo, it was far more devilish. They had taken out a huge sum of money using my life, my only asset, as collateral. They spent it or planned to spend it on their beautiful life, a new kitchen, a dress, whatever. And when it came time to pay the bills, they'd simply let the bank take the condo. And me? They had preemptively evacuated me, hidden me in this wilderness so I wouldn't interfere, wouldn't find out until it was too late. This ruined house wasn't just a gift, it was my tomb, the place where I was supposed to quietly vanish while they finished feasting on the leftovers of my life. All the bitterness, all the maternal hurt, all the doubt washed away in a wave of icy, righteous fury. This was no longer just anger. It was the feeling you get when you see absolute evil and understand you must stop it. Not for revenge, but for justice. For the memory of my husband, who wanted to protect me, and for myself. Marcus, I said into the phone, my voice as hard as steel. I understand. Do everything necessary. Pull all the documents. Prepare the lawsuits. We're going to fight. I've already started, Mrs. Reed. I'm on your side. I know, I replied and hung up. I slowly walked down the hill. The sun had set, but I felt like I could see everything around me with incredible clarity, every blade of grass, every stone on the path. The world hadn't changed. I had. Before, I just wanted my own back. Now I knew I had to go all the way. They had awakened something in me I didn't know I possessed, and they would soon regret it. The news about the mortgage didn't break me. It tempered me, as if I'd been plunged into icy water and then thrust into fire. I hadn't cracked. I'd turned into steel. For all those days, I thought I was fighting for my past, for memory, for fairness. Now I understood. I was fighting for my future, for the right to simply live. The next few days passed in a haze, but it wasn't the fog of despair. It was the fog of extreme concentration. I stopped noticing the household inconveniences. The squeaky bed, the cold water, the meager food from old canned goods I'd found in the root cellar. All of it faded into the background. My body moved automatically, performing necessary tasks while my brain worked clearly and continuously like a well-oiled machine. I tidied up the room with the stove, scrubbing it until it was spotless. I found an old wooden table in the attic and cleaned it up. It became my headquarters. Every evening, I climbed the hill, and now it wasn't just a communication session. It was a war council with Marcus. Mrs. Reed, we've filed a complaint with the district attorney's office regarding mortgage fraud, he reported in his calm, professional voice. I also sent an official notification to the bank, attaching medical records of your condition during the period the agreement was signed. The bank is obligated to begin an internal investigation. Good, I said. What's next? Next, Mrs. Reed, we wait. The first shots have been fired. Just keep busy. They will reveal themselves. And I kept busy. I found an old shovel in the shed and began turning over a small patch of earth in front of the house, clearing it of years of weeds. The work was hard. The soil was compacted, and the roots of the thistles went deep. But with every root I pulled out, I felt like I was freeing not just the earth, but my own soul. I was uprooting my past, my blind love, my self-sacrifice. It was painful but necessary. Then, on the 5th day after our conversation about the mortgage, the bomb dropped. In the evening, as usual, I spoke with Marcus, but this time his voice held a note of restrained triumph. Well, now, Mrs. Reed, he began without preamble, the ice has broken. This morning, a courier delivered a certified letter to your old address for your son and his wife. I pictured it. Morning, coffee in my kitchen, discussing what color cabinets to order. A knock at the door, the courier. They signed for it, casually opened the thick envelope. What was in the letter? I asked. An official notice from me as your legal representative. It states your full and sole right to the condo, warning that any attempt to transact business with it will be legally blocked. And most importantly, it includes a demand for them to provide an explanation within 24 hours regarding the mortgage agreement, which we assert was fraudulently concluded. I sat in silence, absorbing his words. But that's not all, he continued. This same morning, the bank security department, having received my documents, reacted harshly. All accounts to which your son had access, including credit cards and joint savings funds, were frozen pending investigation. Mr. Harrison personally oversaw it. Frozen? I marveled at the precision of the word. Their world, built on my money and my betrayed trust, was now covered in ice. Oh, yes, the lawyer chuckled. The bank called me first. Your son rushed in, screaming, demanding, threatening. When they calmly explained he wouldn't get a dime until the fraud investigation was complete, he turned pale and left. An hour later, his wife came to the bank and threw a fit, demanding to see the manager, screaming about consumer rights, threatening to sue the bank. They politely showed her the door. Their world is collapsing, Mrs. Reed, faster than they expected. I sat on the hilltop, the wind whipping through my hair. I looked at my abandoned town and felt no malice. I felt the restoration of the natural order of things. Justice isn't revenge, it's simply putting everything back in its rightful place. Then my phone rang again, Darren's number. I hung up with Marcus and answered my son's call. Mama, what did you do? That wasn't the voice of my Darren. The soft, slightly condescending tone he had used with me for years was gone. This was a shriek, high-pitched, breaking, full of animal terror. I remained silent. Are you crazy? We got some papers from an attorney. The bank blocked all the cards, everything. We don't even have money for groceries. Did you decide to ruin us? He was breathless with rage and panic. In the background, I could hear Tiffany sobbing, not quiet, bitter tears, but loud, dramatic wails. Do you understand what you're doing? He cried. Tiffany is sick. She can't be stressed. And you? You're trying to destroy our lives because of your old age senility. I didn't do anything, Darren, I said, my voice soft and calm. The contrast between his screaming and my whisper seemed to deafen him. He fell silent. You did all this. You and your wife. What? What did we do? We gave you a gift, bought you a house, and you repay us like this. You tried to steal my condo, Darren. You took out a mortgage against it while I was sick. You dumped me here so I wouldn't find out until the bank took my home. That's what you did. A dead silence hung on the other end of the line, just as dead as the silence in this town. I could only hear his heavy, ragged breathing. He hadn't expected this. He thought I knew nothing, that it was just hurt feelings, just a show. But it turned out to be a verdict. Mama, he finally rasped, a pitiful, fawning note creeping into his voice. Mommy, this is all wrong. It's a mistake, a misunderstanding. We'll explain everything. How about you call it all off, huh? Withdraw all those papers. We'll come and talk. Come on over, I said. Really? Hope crept into his voice. You'll call it all off? No, I said. Come on over. I'm waiting for you. I hung up. That was it. Now they knew. This wasn't a tantrum or hurt feelings. This was war. They knew I knew their darkest secret, and now their panic would turn into despair. Despair drives people to make insane choices. They arrived the next day, close to noon. I heard them long before I saw them. The roar of an engine that fiercely and inappropriately shattered the quiet of this sleepy town, and the screech of tires right next to my house. Dust rose in a column, settling on the wild currant bushes. I didn't move. I sat on the same porch where they had dumped me just days earlier, cleaning new potatoes with an old knife, tiny ones the size of quail eggs that I'd found in the overgrown garden. My lunch. The car door slammed almost simultaneously. Darren jumped out first, pale and haggard, with dark circles under his eyes. He wore an expensive shirt, but it was crumpled, as if he had slept in it. Tiffany emerged slowly behind him, her face puffy, her makeup smeared, but she still tried to hold her head high, wearing that look of disgusted superiority that had become second nature to her. They stopped a few feet from the porch, staring at me. I didn't lift my head, continuing to carefully slice the thin skin off a potato. This simple, monotonous work grounded me, preventing emotions from taking over. I was not a participant in the drama, but an observer. "Mama," Darren began, his voice hoarse and pleading. He stepped forward, extending his hands as if to hug me. I didn't pull away. I just kept looking at my hands. "Mommy, what is this? Why are you doing this to us?" I dropped the cleaned potato into a bowl of water and picked up the next one. "I was waiting for you," I answered without looking up. That simple sentence threw him off. He expected shouting, accusations, tears, anything but this icy, detached calmness. "Mama, this is all some terrible misunderstanding. We're family. Families are supposed to help each other, not sue each other." He spoke rehearsed words, correct but empty. There wasn't a drop of sincerity in them, only fear. Fear of losing everything he thought was his by right. At that point, Tiffany's patience snapped. She stepped forward, pushing Darren aside. "Enough with this circus," she hissed, her face contorted with malice. "Have you completely lost your mind in your old age? Did you go feral out here in the sticks? What right did you have to block our accounts? Who gave you that right?" She was practically screaming. Her thin, unpleasant voice assaulted my ears. "Do you even realize what you've done?" she continued, pointing her perfectly manicured finger at me. "You're embarrassing us. We had to cancel the kitchen order." "Cancel it. People are laughing at us, and me. I'm not supposed to be stressed. The doctor forbade it. I'm carrying your grandchild, and you're driving us into poverty." She played her ace card, the pregnancy. In the past, that single word would have made me forget myself and rush to fulfill their every whim. But not now. The ice in my chest didn't even tremble. I slowly lifted my eyes to her, looking long and intently without blinking, as one looks at an unfamiliar, unpleasant object. My gaze made her stop short. She faltered, fell silent, but then immediately recollected herself, flushing with anger again. Darren jumped in, trying to play the peacemaker. "Mama, seriously, Tiffany is right. She can't be nervous. Please, let's resolve this nicely. I know you're hurt. We understand. We were wrong. Maybe this house wasn't the best gift, but we'll fix everything. We'll take it all back. Just call your lawyer. Tell him you've changed your mind right now. Here, take my phone." He held out his shiny smartphone to me as if it were that simple. "Call and all their lies, all their betrayal will disappear, wiped away like writing in the sand." I put the knife and the last potato in the bowl, wiped my hands on an old apron, and slowly stood up, now on the same level as them. They stood on the ground. I was a step higher on my porch. "You want me to call it all off?" I asked quietly. "Yes, yes, Mommy," Darren nodded eagerly. Tiffany watched me defiantly, lips pressed tight. "So I can give you my retirement money, my condo, my life all over again?" "Mama, don't exaggerate," Darren grimaced. "The condo is ours together, and we would have always taken care of you." "Like you took care of me when I was sick?" I asked, my voice quiet, echoing in the silence that followed. They froze. I shifted my gaze to Tiffany, who instinctively took a tiny step backward. "I remember everything, Tiff," I said, finally calling her by the name she liked. "I remember you sitting by my bedside. I remember your caring hands. And I remember the papers you slipped me, telling me they were for the tax office, for the HOA, a mere formality." Tiffany's face went white. Her spite, rage, and confidence slid off her like bad makeup in the rain, leaving only naked animal fear. Darren looked from me to his wife, not understanding. "Mama, what are you talking about?" There was fear in his eyes, but also incomprehension. Maybe he really hadn't known all the details. Maybe she had tricked him. Or maybe he simply preferred not to know. It didn't matter anymore. He was an accomplice. "I'm talking about the mortgage, Darren," I said, enunciating every word. "The big mortgage you took out at the bank 8 months ago, using my condo as collateral with my signature, a signature you got while I was delirious. Did you think I would never find out? Did you think I would quietly die here in this shack and the bank would simply take my home for your debts?" The blow hit home. It was evident in how Darren staggered, as if punched in the gut. He looked at Tiffany with horror and newfound bitter realization. She wasn't looking at him. She was staring at the ground, at her expensive shoes now stained with dirt. All their tricks, all their manipulation crumbled to dust. They stood before me, naked in their greed and lies. The masks were ripped off. The show was over. "So, Darren," I finished in my calm, even voice, "do you still want me to call the lawyer?" He couldn't utter a word. He just opened and closed his mouth like a fish stranded on the shore. Tiffany pulled her head into her shoulders, turning from predator to cornered animal. The pause was long and heavy. In that moment, the last drop of my maternal love for him died. It died and was buried right there next to that rotten porch. "Leave," I said. It wasn't a command or request. It was a simple statement of fact, like "it is raining" or "night has fallen." They turned around in silence, not looking at each other, like puppets whose strings had been cut, and trudged to their expensive, shiny car. The engine started, not with a roar, but tiredly. The car slowly, almost uncertainly, turned around and rolled away down the dusty road. I remained alone on the porch. Next to me sat the bowl of clean potatoes, my lunch, my new life. The air around me felt wonderfully clean. After they left, silence fell, but it was different now, not dead and oppressive like on the first day, but calm and full of dignity. I boiled my potatoes on the stove, and they tasted like the most delicious food in the world. I ate slowly, sitting at my clean table, looking out the window I had finally managed to unboard and wash. Beyond it was my overgrown yard, and among the weeds I spotted a few peony bushes, their dark red buds about to bloom. I thought that was the end, that they, crushed and exposed, would leave me alone and try to clean up the mess they had made. But I underestimated them again. I forgot that a cornered animal doesn't seek repentance. It seeks a way to bite one last time. About a week passed. During that time, I managed to meet my only neighbor, or rather, he came to me. One morning, while hauling a bucket of water from the well, I heard a calm, low voice behind me. "Here, neighbor, let me help you." Turning that windlass isn't a woman's job. I turned around. Standing before me was a tall, lean old man with a gray beard and incredibly clear blue eyes. With a single easy hand, he finished cranking the windlass, grabbed the bucket, and set it on the ground. "Curtis Baker," he introduced himself, extending a wide, calloused hand. "I live in that house over there, 2 properties down, last of the old guard in this town." "Evelyn Reed," I replied, shaking his firm hand. That's how our acquaintance began. Curtis, or Uncle Kurt as he asked me to call him, turned out to be a former county commissioner, an old-school man, reserved but wise and grounded. He didn't ask how I ended up here. He just saw. He saw the expensive car that brought me, then drove away. He saw me alone, struggling to make this abandoned house livable, and understood everything without words. He started helping me. One day, he'd bring a few dry logs. Another day, he'd share milk from his goat. Sometimes he'd just stop by in the evening to sit on the porch and talk about the weather or the chances of a good harvest. His quiet presence became a huge support for me. Next to him, I didn't feel alone. I felt safe. Then the final battle erupted. One morning, while watering my future peonies, I heard the sound of engines. Not one, but several. A whole convoy approached my town. 3 passenger cars stopped by my house, and people began to get out. I recognized them. My cousin, Aunt Carol from Raleigh, North Carolina, with her husband, my late husband's nephew Darnell with his wife, a few other distant relatives I'd only seen at funerals and weddings. And leading them like 2 generals were Darren and Tiffany. Darren looked even worse than last time, thinner with a twitching eyelid. Tiffany, however, had transformed. She wore a simple dark dress, no makeup, her hair pulled back in a modest bun. Universal sorrow was written on her face as she held Darren's arm, supporting him as if he might collapse at any moment. They arranged the relatives in a semicircle, as if for an execution, and Darren, urged on by Tiffany's quiet whisper, began to speak. His voice trembled, but it wasn't panic this time. It was well-rehearsed grief. "Dear ones, Aunt Carol, Darnell, thank you for coming," he began, sweeping his gaze over everyone tragically. "We called you because a tragedy has struck our family, a great tragedy." He paused, letting the words sink in. The relatives looked at me with confusion and sympathy. "Our mother, Evelyn Reed, she's sick," Darren said, his voice breaking. "After her bout with pneumonia, she started having mental issues. She forgets everything, confuses things. She's imagined conspiracies, imagined mortgages. She doesn't recognize us. She accuses us of terrible things." I stood there with the watering can in my hands, listening to this absurd theater. I couldn't believe my ears. They had decided to declare me insane in order to take everything, making their fraud merely a product of my diseased imagination. "We wanted to get her treatment," Tiffany continued in her sorrowful, angelic little voice, wiping a dry eye with the corner of a tissue. "We looked for the best doctors, a clinic, but she ran away. She found this abandoned house and is hiding here. She refused help, blocked all the accounts so we couldn't pay for her treatment. She's a danger to herself. We're afraid she'll do something to herself." Aunt Carol, a kind-hearted woman, gasped and pressed her hands to her chest. "Evie, sweetheart, what is this? Come home, back to the city. You need to be treated in a hospital." They looked at me as if I were a violent lunatic, a mixture of pity, fear, and a kind of revulsion. I stood silent. Any word from me would be seen as a symptom of my illness, aggression, inappropriate response. Just when it seemed like everything was lost, that I had lost this final, dirtiest battle, I heard the calm creak of a gate behind me. "May I be nosy?" a voice inquired. "What's this gathering about?" Everyone turned around. Uncle Kurt stood on the path. He wore his usual work clothes, but stood straight as a general. His clear blue eyes surveyed the entire delegation, stopping at Darren and Tiffany and then resting on me. "And you, excuse me, who are you?" Tiffany asked hotly, looking him up and down. "Me? I'm the neighbor," he replied calmly. "Curtis Baker. And who are you nice folks who came here to scare this woman with a whole crowd?" "We're her relatives," Darren yelled hotly. "We came to rescue her. She's not right in the head." Uncle Kurt slowly walked over and stood next to me. He wasn't looking at me, but I felt his solid presence. "Not right in the head, you say? Strange. I've been talking to Evelyn Reed for a week now, and I see a perfectly sane, clear-headed, and very strong woman. A woman her own son brought out on her birthday and threw out in this shack like useless garbage. I saw it with my own eyes." The relatives murmured among themselves. Aunt Carol looked at Darren with doubt. "And I also see a woman," Uncle Kurt continued, his voice growing firmer, "who is turning this shack into a home all by herself without help from anyone. She lit the stove, cleaned up, and is working the garden. Is that how crazy people behave? To me, that's how people act when everything has been taken from them. But they couldn't take the most important thing, the will to live." The pause was long and heavy. In that moment, the last drop of my maternal love for him died. It died and was buried right there next to that rotten porch. "Leave," I said. It wasn't a command or request. It was a simple statement of fact, like "it is raining" or "night has fallen." They turned around in silence, not looking at each other, like puppets whose strings had been cut, and trudged to their expensive, shiny car. The engine started, not with a roar, but tiredly. The car slowly, almost uncertainly, turned around and rolled away down the dusty road. I remained alone on the porch. Next to me sat the bowl of clean potatoes, my lunch, my new life. The air around me felt wonderfully clean. After they left, silence fell, but it was different now, not dead and oppressive like on the first day, but calm and full of dignity. I boiled my potatoes on the stove, and they tasted like the most delicious food in the world. I ate slowly, sitting at my clean table, looking out the window I had finally managed to unboard and wash. Beyond it was my overgrown yard, and among the weeds I spotted a few peony bushes, their dark red buds about to bloom. I thought that was the end, that they, crushed and exposed, would leave me alone and try to clean up the mess they had made. But I underestimated them again. I forgot that a cornered animal doesn't seek repentance. It seeks a way to bite one last time. About a week passed. During that time, I managed to meet my only neighbor, or rather, he came to me. One morning, while hauling a bucket of water from the well, I heard a calm, low voice behind me. Here, neighbor, let me help you. Turning that windlass isn't a woman's job. I turned around. Standing before me was a tall, lean old man with a gray beard and incredibly clear blue eyes. With a single easy hand, he finished cranking the windlass, grabbed the bucket, and set it on the ground. Curtis Baker, he introduced himself, extending a wide, calloused hand. I live in that house over there, 2 properties down, last of the old guard in this town. Evelyn Reed, I replied, shaking his firm hand. That's how our acquaintance began. Curtis, or Uncle Kurt as he asked me to call him, turned out to be a former county commissioner, an old-school man, reserved but wise and grounded. He didn't ask how I ended up here. He just saw. He saw the expensive car that brought me, then drove away. He saw me alone, struggling to make this abandoned house livable, and understood everything without words. He started helping me. One day, he'd bring a few dry logs. Another day, he'd share milk from his goat. Sometimes he'd just stop by in the evening to sit on the porch and talk about the weather or the chances of a good harvest. His quiet presence became a huge support for me. Next to him, I didn't feel alone. I felt safe. Then the final battle erupted. One morning, while watering my future peonies, I heard the sound of engines. Not one, but several. A whole convoy approached my town. 3 passenger cars stopped by my house, and people began to get out. I recognized them. My cousin, Aunt Carol from Raleigh, North Carolina, with her husband, my late husband's nephew Darnell with his wife, a few other distant relatives I'd only seen at funerals and weddings. And leading them like 2 generals were Darren and Tiffany. Darren looked even worse than last time, thinner with a twitching eyelid. Tiffany, however, had transformed. She wore a simple dark dress, no makeup, her hair pulled back in a modest bun. Universal sorrow was written on her face as she held Darren's arm, supporting him as if he might collapse at any moment. They arranged the relatives in a semicircle, as if for an execution, and Darren, urged on by Tiffany's quiet whisper, began to speak. His voice trembled, but it wasn't panic this time. It was well-rehearsed grief. Dear ones, Aunt Carol, Darnell, thank you for coming, he began, sweeping his gaze over everyone tragically. We called you because a tragedy has struck our family, a great tragedy. He paused, letting the words sink in. The relatives looked at me with confusion and sympathy. Our mother, Evelyn Reed, she's sick, Darren said, his voice breaking. After her bout with pneumonia, she started having mental issues. She forgets everything, confuses things. She's imagined conspiracies, imagined mortgages. She doesn't recognize us. She accuses us of terrible things. I stood there with the watering can in my hands, listening to this absurd theater. I couldn't believe my ears. They had decided to declare me insane in order to take everything, making their fraud merely a product of my diseased imagination. We wanted to get her treatment, Tiffany continued in her sorrowful, angelic little voice, wiping a dry eye with the corner of a tissue. We looked for the best doctors, a clinic, but she ran away. She found this abandoned house and is hiding here. She refused help, blocked all the accounts so we couldn't pay for her treatment. She's a danger to herself. We're afraid she'll do something to herself. Aunt Carol, a kind-hearted woman, gasped and pressed her hands to her chest. Evie, sweetheart, what is this? Come home, back to the city. You need to be treated in a hospital. They looked at me as if I were a violent lunatic, a mixture of pity, fear, and a kind of revulsion. I stood silent. Any word from me would be seen as a symptom of my illness. Aggression, inappropriate response. Just when it seemed like everything was lost, that I had lost this final, dirtiest battle, I heard the calm creak of a gate behind me. May I be nosy? A voice inquired. What's this gathering about? Everyone turned around. Uncle Kurt stood on the path. He wore his usual work clothes, but stood straight as a general. His clear blue eyes surveyed the entire delegation, stopping at Darren and Tiffany and then resting on me. And you, excuse me, who are you? Tiffany asked hotly, looking him up and down. Me? I'm the neighbor, he replied calmly. Curtis Baker. And who are you nice folks who came here to scare this woman with a whole crowd? We're her relatives, Darren yelled hotly. We came to rescue her. She's not right in the head. Uncle Kurt slowly walked over and stood next to me. He wasn't looking at me, but I felt his solid presence. Not right in the head, you say? Strange. I've been talking to Evelyn Reed for a week now, and I see a perfectly sane, clear headed, and very strong woman. A woman her own son brought out on her birthday and threw out in this shack like useless garbage. I saw it with my own eyes. The relatives murmured among themselves. Aunt Carol looked at Darren with doubt. And I also see a woman, Uncle Kurt continued, his voice growing firmer, who is turning this shack into a home all by herself without help from anyone. She lit the stove, cleaned up, and is working the garden. Is that how crazy people behave? To me, that's how people act when everything has been taken from them. But they couldn't take the most important thing, the will to live. He stepped closer to the delegation. And as for you two young folks, he shifted his gaze to Tiffany. You seem strange to me. You came in an expensive car, dressed to the nines, but you say your mother cut off all your funds. How did you get here on your last dime? And you don't look like grieving children. You look more like con artists who came to shake down an old woman for her last bit of cash. Only instead of threats, you're using tears and lies. He spoke the last words loudly and distinctly, and they hit their target. The relatives who had come with sympathy for Darren now looked at him and Tiffany with suspicion. Their well-planned show was collapsing before their eyes. Aunt Carol walked over to me. Evie, is it true he kicked you out? I nodded quietly, and that was enough. All their lies burst like a soap bubble. The relatives began to whisper, casting angry, judging glances at Darren and Tiffany. Darnell, the nephew, a big man, walked up to Darren. What in the world are you doing, you scumbag? Decided to drive your own mother to her grave? Darren backed away. Tiffany grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the car. Their public trial had turned into their public shame. They fled, running from the very people they had brought as their judges. The cars turned around one after another and drove away. Finally, only Uncle Kurt and I remained on the road. I turned to him. Thank you, I whispered. He just smiled into his gray beard. Don't mention it, neighbor. Telling the truth isn't help, it's a duty. I watched the dust from their cars settle on the road, and I knew this was the end, the absolute end. They hadn't lost in court or at the bank. They had lost here, in front of simple people, and this defeat was worse for them than any financial crash. It was moral bankruptcy, complete and utter. The dust on the road settled, and with it, the dust of my past life settled too. Since that day, when my relatives came to witness my shame, only for it to turn into my son's shame, I never heard from them again. Marcus Jones, my loyal attorney, saw the case through to the end. The bank recognized the mortgage agreement as fraudulent, especially after several relatives agreed to testify about Darren and Tiffany's strange behavior and their attempt to declare me incompetent. All charges against me were dropped. I didn't bother to find out what happened to them next. I only know they faced criminal charges for fraud and had to deal with the consequences of their actions without my help, without my money, and without my forgiveness. Their world, built on lies, crumbled, burying them under its ruins. And my life was just beginning at 63. The first thing I did, once all the legal formalities were settled, was sell the condo on Peachtree Road without regret. I went there one last time to pick up my most valuable possessions, the photo album, a few books, and Paul's old armchair. Walking through the empty, echoing rooms, I felt nostalgia. This place had ceased to be my home. It had become just a piece of property, cold and foreign. My home was here now, in this quiet, abandoned town. The money from the sale, combined with the funds in my secret savings account, I invested in reliable, if not highly profitable assets, as Marcus advised. This gave me certainty, the certainty that I would never again have to depend on anyone, that I could pay for my own treatment if needed, for firewood in winter, and for a new roof for my house. I started building, not literally, of course. I hired a crew from the nearby county seat, 2 smart, sober men. They replaced my roof, installed new wooden windows, built a new stove, a real old-fashioned one with a hearth, and constructed a new sturdy porch that no longer creaked or wobbled. I didn't supervise them. I worked alongside them, fetching, painting, cleaning. They looked at me with surprise at first, and then with respect. Evelyn, you're something else, their foreman Mitch told me. You've got a backbone most men don't. I just smiled. I hadn't known I had a backbone, All my life, I thought I was soft and yielding. It turned out a core had been inside me all along. It just hadn't been allowed to show. The house transformed before my eyes. From a black, gloomy shack, it became a cozy, bright cabin. I whitewashed the walls myself, hung simple gingham curtains with tiny floral patterns on the windows, placed Paul's armchair in the corner, arranged my books on the shelves, and the house came alive. It began to breathe. In the spring, I took on the garden. Uncle Kurt helped me uproot the old diseased trees and lay out a vegetable patch. For the first time in my life, I planted potatoes, carrots, and onions myself, caring for every sprout like a small child. And the earth, sensing my care, responded with unprecedented generosity. My peonies, which I first saw bloom that day, grew into huge, lush bushes, blooming so gorgeously it took my breath away. I remembered how my grandmother taught me to embroider as a child. I found the hoops in the old chest and bought thread and canvas in town. In the evenings, sitting by the warm stove, I began to embroider simple patterns, flowers, birds, ornaments. My fingers remembered. This monotonous work was soothing. It put my thoughts in order. I no longer talked to Paul's photograph. I felt he was right there with me and would have been proud. Uncle Kurt and I became true friends. We didn't pry into each other's souls, but we understood everything without words. In the evenings, he often stopped by for tea with the herbs we gathered in the woods. We sat on my new porch, drank tea from old earthenware cups, and watched the sunset in silence. That silence held more meaning than all the conversations I had endured over the past 10 years. Sometimes I thought about my son, but it was no longer pain or resentment. It was compassion, as one feels for a lost stranger. I raised him. I gave him everything I could, but I couldn't instill in him what he lacked, a conscience. And that wasn't my fault. It was his choice. I let him go, mentally cutting the last thread that still connected me to him. He was no longer my duty, my pain, my responsibility. He was simply a man who had once been my son. I'm 65 now, sitting on my porch, holding a cup of hot tea blended from herbs in my yard. The sun sets behind the woods, painting the sky in incredible colors. The air smells of mown grass and flowers. Inside, the firewood crackles warmly in the stove. A stray kitten I named Vasya is purring on my lap. I look at my hands, rough from working in the garden. My nails aren't as manicured as before, but these are the hands of a living person, a person who is building her own life. Sometimes I think I should be grateful to Darren and Tiffany. If it weren't for their cruelty, I'd still be living my days as a shadow in someone else's life. I would never have known what I was capable of. I would never have met Uncle Kurt, never seen these peonies bloom, never felt the taste of water from my own well. They wanted to bury me, and instead, they gave me life. A real life. I take a sip of the tea. It's tart, fragrant, alive. I think that dignity isn't something others give you. It isn't their respect or recognition. Dignity is what you find within yourself. It's what you reclaim from fear, resentment, and despair. It's what you take back for yourself when it seems like everything is lost, and that quiet, hard-won victory, that is true happiness, and that is true freedom. Did you enjoy my story? If you listened until the end, drop a number 1 in the comments. If you liked it, you can support me by liking the video and sending a small tip. I have plenty of other life stories like this on my channel, so make sure to subscribe and check them out. I've added 2 new stories on screen that everyone loves. Thanks for being here. See you in the next one. With love.